The sun had fully risen by the time Elara made her way back to the cabin, the smooth blue stone cradled carefully in her hands. Morning birds sang in the trees with soft chirps, like the gentle stirrings of a new day. The forest smelled of pine and earth and light, an aroma that felt ancient, as if the world had just been washed clean. Inside the cabin, everything was exactly as she had left it. The wooden floor creaked familiarly beneath her feet. The little table still carried the remains of last night's tea, and the hearth, though quiet, radiated a sense of home. But something within her had shifted so deeply that it was as if she was seeing it all for the very first time. She placed the glowing stone on the windowsill, where the morning sun touched it gently. It didn't shine quite as brightly now. It didn't need to. Its work was done. The healing it had awakened would not fade with time. It had nestled itself into her spirit, quiet and enduring. Elara spent the rest of the day slowly, with deep intention. She wandered the nearby meadows, brushed her fingers over wildflowers, and dipped her hands into the clear stream that wound its way through the forest. She found herself smiling at the wind, pausing to listen to the hush of leaves, laughing when a squirrel dashed past her and flicked its tail in sass. The world hadn't changed, but she had, and somehow that made all the difference. As the sky turned to dusk and the forest softened again into blue shadows and gold-edged clouds, Elara returned to the lake one final time. The path felt even more familiar now, like a trail, not just of footprints, but of memory and transformation. The lake greeted her with its usual hush, its surface calm and waiting. Fireflies danced along the edges, blinking lazily as though they too were beginning to feel drowsy. Elara sat down on the same mossy bank where she had slept just the night before, the same spot where she had floated, received, remembered. But this time, she wasn't searching. She was simply present. She closed her eyes and let the breeze brush her skin. She thought of all the things she had let go, the fear, the pressure, the idea that she had to be more, do more, heal faster, and in their place, she had found something far greater: stillness, belonging, peace. It wasn't perfection, but it was wholeness, and that, she realized, was enough. As the stars began to bloom across the velvet sky, she whispered into the dark, "I'm ready now. Not ready to leave, not ready to abandon this sacred place, but ready to carry its truth with her wherever she would go next." The lake didn't respond with words. It didn't need to. Its reflection shimmered quietly, like a nod of agreement between old friends. Elara rose slowly, taking one last look at the water, letting the silence wash over her one more time. Then she walked back to the cabin, under a canopy of stars, each one winking softly, as if tucking her in. Inside, she lit a small lantern and placed it on the bedside table. The bed was soft and warm, wrapped in linen sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. She slipped under the covers and lay still, staring at the wooden ceiling above, her hands resting gently on her stomach. Her mind was quiet, her heart was full, and her soul was at rest. Outside, the lake whispered to the night. The trees stood in gentle guard, and the stars watched over it all. Elara let out a long, slow breath, a release, a surrender, a beginning, and as her eyes drifted closed and her body sank deeper into rest, the world around her seemed to murmur in a voice only dreams could hear. "You are whole, you are loved, you are home. Good night, dear soul. Sleep softly, the healing has begun." Hello, friends. I am here to tell you a relaxing story which lead you to sleep with sweet dreams. let's start our new story, The Healing Lake. There was a time when Ilara's days felt endless, not in the way of wonder or delight, but like a song repeating the same note over and over until even silence felt loud. The city's rhythm, once exciting, had turned into a dull ache behind her eyes. So when the invitation came, not in the form of a letter, but in a dream, she didn't question it. In the dream, there was a path, soft with moss, trees like tall, wise guardians, a hush over everything, as if the forest knew how to hold secrets gently. And there, just beyond the trees, a glimmer of still water, bathing in moonlight, a voice so soft it felt like a breeze against her cheek, whispered, "Come rest, come heal." She woke with the taste of it still in her mouth, and that morning, without quite knowing why, she packed a bag. There were no clear directions, only instinct and a memory, vague but persistent, that somewhere, beyond the highways, beyond the noise, there was a place the world had forgotten, a lake say to carry peace in its depths, a lake people spoke of only in old stories, like a lullaby passed from grandmother to child. Ilara left behind her buzzing phone, the clock that ticked too loudly, the schedule filled with things she no longer loved. She drove for hours, then walked when the road gave way to earth. The trees greeted her like familiar friends, their branches arched above her in silent welcome, casting gentle shadows over the mossy path. The forest had its own language, a soft rustle here, a bird's gentle call there, the wind moving slowly, deliberately, as if it knew she was listening for something deeper. The deeper she walked, the more the edges of her mind began to loosen. Her thoughts, once crowded and chaotic, slowed, like a stream settling after rain. The path was not marked, but her feet seemed to know the way. Beneath her boots, the earth felt soft, giving. Ferns brushed against her calves, and the scent of damp pine filled her lungs like an old memory. Occasionally, a shaft of golden light broke through the canopy, warming her skin and reminding her of the sun she had forgotten to notice. She paused once to sit on a flat rock, its surface worn smooth by time. All around her, the forest exhaled, and in that moment, Ilara realized she hadn't heard her own breath in weeks. She listened now to the rise and fall of her chest, to the calm beating of her heart, to the silence that didn't feel empty but full. Somewhere nearby, a stream gurgled softly like a lullaby sung only for the trees. She closed her eyes and imagined herself melding into the sounds, becoming part of the forest's rhythm. Time, in that place, did not push or pull, it simply was. As she walked on, the moss deepened beneath her feet. It muffled her steps until it seemed she was floating, not walking. She saw shapes carved into tree trunks, spirals, crescent moons, delicate waves, perhaps made by those who had come before her, those who had also sought the healing lake. The forest felt ancient, kind, as though it knew pain but did not judge it. Eventually the trees thinned, and a soft glow teased the edges of her vision. The air grew cooler, lighter, and tinged with something sweet, like the breath of spring. Ilara stopped. Ahead, just barely visible through the last curtain of pine, was the glint of water. Not yet the lake, just the promise of it. But she knew then. She was close, and though her leg ached and her back protested, she smiled. For the first time in a long time, her smile reached her eyes. She pressed her hand gently to her chest, feeling the quiet within her. The forest had already begun its work. The path, with its silence and soft moss, had opened a door inside her. One she hadn't known was shut, and as twilight deepened, she stepped quietly forward toward whatever waited beyond the trees, toward the lake, toward healing, toward peace. The forest gently cradled the coming night, its shadows lengthening like soft arms stretching across the moss. Elara followed the narrowing path, her limbs heavy but not exhausted, more like lulled into a slower rhythm, the way a rocking chair eases the body into rest. She had no map, no clear destination, yet her feet moved with quiet certainty, drawn not by logic, but by a feeling, like a string tied to her heart, gently pulling her forward. Then she saw it. Tucked just beyond a row of tall pines was a cabin, small, weathered, and nestled like a forgotten memory. It looked as though it had grown from the forest itself, with vines brushing the windows and moss dusting the roof. Smoke curled lazily from the stone chimney, painting thin spirals against the dusk sky. Elara paused for a moment, her breath caught in her chest. The cabin didn't feel strange or foreign. It felt like something she had once dreamed of long ago and had only now remembered, as if it had been waiting for her. The wooden steps creaked softly under her boots as she approached. The door, slightly ajar, opened with a whisper. Inside, golden firelight spilled across wooden floors and danced on the log walls. The scent of cedar, faintly sweet and warm, wrapped around her like a comforting shawl. She stepped inside slowly, reverently. It was quiet, but not empty. A thick wool blanket was folded neatly across an old rocking chair. A kettle sat atop the hearth, gently steaming as though someone had just stepped out and might return at any moment. Candles lined a low shelf, their soft flames flickering in rhythm with the fire. The space felt lived in, but not recently, like the forest had taken care of it in someone's absence, a home remembered by nature itself. Elara ran her fingers along a carved wooden table, then sat down on a small bench beside it. There, tucked between a lantern and a smooth river stone, lay a worn leather journal. Its pages were thick, edges curled from time and touch. She opened it slowly, almost holding her breath. The handwriting was delicate and steady, ink faded in places but still readable. The first page simply read, "To those who come in search of stillness, you are not alone. This place knows how to hold you." A warmth spread through her chest. She turned the pages gently, eyes scanning entries filled with quiet reflections, fragments of sorrow released, dreams remembered, fears softened by time and solitude. Each page was like a letter left for the next soul to find shelter here. And now it was her turn. Elara pressed her palm over the open page, not to read, but to feel. The journal felt like it carried more than words. It carried energy, the kind that lingers in places where hearts have opened and healed. She didn't know how long she sat there, the fire casting long shadows across the floor, the quiet pressing against the windows like velvet. Eventually, she rose and explored the small kitchen, finding a jar of herbal tea leaves and a clay cup. She boiled water from the pump just outside and steeped a gentle blend of chamomile and mint. Outside, the forest sighed. Crickets began their night song, low and rhythmic. The wind whispered through the trees like a lullaby only they could sing. Wrapped in the wool blanket, Elara curled into the rocking chair and let herself be rocked, just a little, back and forth, back and forth. Her fingers still rested on the journal, her tea warm in her hands. She closed her eyes. The fire crackled, the chair creaked, and somewhere inside her, something that had been tight and tense began to loosen, unraveling like a ribbon. Here, in this quiet cabin beneath the pines. She didn't need to explain herself. She didn't need to hurry or heal all at once. She only needed to rest. And so, in the tender hush of that pine-sheltered space, with firelight flickering on her closed eyelids and the forest breathing all around her, Elara drifted softly into sleep. Not the restless kind, but the kind that begins the real healing. Elara awoke just before dawn, stirred not by sound, but by stillness. A stillness so profound it had a presence. The fire in the hearth had dwindled to glowing embers, and the cabin held that special hush that only happens in the last hour of night, when the world is holding its breath. She sat up slowly, wrapped the wool blanket tighter around her shoulders, and padded barefoot across the cool wooden floor. The windows were fogged with the breath of night, but through the misted glass she could see a faint silver light beginning to stretch across the world. Something was calling. Outside, the forest wore a robe of soft fog. The trees were silhouettes, tall and quiet, their tips disappearing into the silver sky. The pines whispered to one another in windless murmurs. Dew clung to every blade of grass, every leaf, catching the first bits of morning light like tiny stars fallen to earth. Elara stepped down from the cabin porch, her breath forming gentle clouds in the cool air. The path ahead was not marked, but she followed it anyway, the ground soft beneath her feet. Pine needles cushioned each step, and the hush of the early morning wrapped around her like a lullaby. As she moved deeper into the thinning woods, the light grew, pale blue and soft pink, bleeding into the silver. Then she heard it. Silence, but not the absence of sound. It was the kind of silence that hums, like something alive. She knew then she was close, and there it was. The trees opened suddenly like parted curtains, and the lake revealed itself. It was more than beautiful. It was sacred. The surface was perfectly still, like a mirror laid flat between the trees. Mist curled above it, not in chaotic swirls, but in gentle spirals that moved as if they too were breathing. The sky reflected on the water like a painting, pastel shades blending into one another, shifting gently with the rising sun. Elara stood at the edge, her heart caught in her throat. She could hear nothing but the slow beat of her pulse, and yet she felt the lake speaking, without words, without sound. It said, "You found me, you're safe now." Her eyes brimmed with quiet tears. She didn't understand why, not entirely, only that something inside her had softened the moment she looked into the water. She felt seen, not by a person, but by the lake itself, as if it knew her, not just the version of her that moved through the world, but the one that existed beneath it all, the tired one, the hurting one, the one still searching. She sat down on a mossy stone, tucking her knees to her chest, and simply gazed. The lake had no waves, no ripples. It was as if time paused at its edge. All her worries, the lists, the noise, the regrets, they quieted, not gone, but muted, less sharp, less necessary. A gentle breeze stirred, and with it came the faintest scent of lavender and wild mint. It wrapped around her like an embrace, and for a moment she imagined the lake had arms. She traced a finger through the soil beside her, drawing spirals without thinking. Her mind didn't wander, it settled. Her body didn't ache, it relaxed. Every part of her that had been tense for so long now felt weightless. As she sat there, the first beams of golden sunlight stretched across the lake's surface, casting a soft shimmer over the mist. It felt like watching the world be born again, slowly and without rush. Nothing about it was loud. Everything about it was healing. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out the journal she had brought from the cabin. Without planning what to say, she opened to a blank page and began to write, not with urgency, but with peace, not to make sense of anything, but to remember this feeling, this moment, the stillness, the quiet knowing. When the sun had risen just enough to warm her cheeks, she closed the journal and pressed it gently to her heart. Ilara smiled, not because something had been solved or finished, but because something inside her had begun. And as she sat there beside the healing lake, with the mist thinning and the day beginning, she whispered softly, "Thank you." That afternoon, after the sun had warmed the lake and the forest had begun to hum with quiet life, Ilara felt something stir inside her, not restlessness, not urgency, something subtler, a pull like a thread gently unwinding from a tightly bound knot. It was time. The lake had called her here, not just to rest, but to release. She walked the winding trail back to the cabin beneath the pines, each step slow and thoughtful, her senses alive. The wind moved through the trees like a soft chorus, brushing her skin and playing with the edges of her hair. She let it carry away what no longer belonged to her. Inside the cabin, the fire had returned to quiet embers. Ilara took the journal from the wooden table, opened to a fresh page, and began to write. Not neatly, not carefully, just honestly. She poured out everything that needed to be let go. She wrote down fears she hadn't named aloud, memories that had stuck like stones beneath her ribs, regrets that echoed at night, expectations she had held too tightly, wounds she had hidden even from herself. It all came out in loops and scratches of ink, the page swelling slightly from her pressed hand. When she finished, she set the pen down and placed her palm over the words. Her eyes closed. She took a breath in, deep and slow, then exhaled, as if breathing out the years she'd carried it all. The wind outside had shifted, gentle but purposeful. The cabin felt different now, not just a shelter, but a guide. At the hearth, she carefully tore the page from the journal, folding it into a small square. Her hands trembled, not with fear, but with the sacredness of it. The page held pieces of her, ready to be released. She walked back toward the lake, the folded page tucked into her palm. By the time she reached the water, twilight had settled. The lake shimmered with fading gold and the softest shade of lavender, as if holding the sky's breath in its still body. Mist hovered at its edges, curling and waving like the fingers of an unseen presence. Ilara stood at the shore, the folded paper resting in her hands. She closed her eyes and whispered, not a grand speech, just the truth. I release you, I thank you, and I set you free. With a breath both shaky and sure, she set the folded paper on the surface of the lake. For a moment, it floated, gently, like a lily pad adrift. Then the water welcomed it, slowly pulling it beneath the surface. The ripples it left behind widened and softened until the lake was smooth again, as if the burden had been accepted without judgment. She stayed there for a long time, watching the stillness return. The act was simple, but something had shifted. She felt it in her chest, like space had opened where tightness used to live. Above her, the first stars appeared, one by one, like blessings scattered across the sky. And in that moment, she knew something she hadn't known before. Letting go doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean erasing the past. It means allowing yourself to make room for peace, to stop clinging to what has already shaped you. It means trusting that healing doesn't always roar, it sometimes whispers. Ilara dipped her fingers into the lake, feeling the coolness kiss her skin. A silence so deep surrounded her that it hummed, and in that silence she felt the lake again, not as something outside of her, but something within, a reflection, a mirror, a witness. She stood and pressed her damp fingers over her heart, then turned slowly back toward the path. The lake had taken what she gave it, without condition, without demand. Now she could walk forward a little lighter, a little softer. She had made space for what might come next. And as the stars brightened and the pines whispered goodnight, Ilara walked quietly back to the cabin, the forest parting for her like a memory remembered with love. She slept that night without dreams, wrapped in stillness, her breath deep and steady, no longer carrying it all, because some part of her now belonged to the lake, and some part of the lake, quietly and forever, now belonged to her. That evening, the forest fell into a silence deeper than Ilara had yet felt. The sun had tucked itself away behind the hills, and a tender blue twilight settled like a shawl across the world. Even the birds, usually chattering in the trees before dusk, had hushed early, as if they, too, sensed the sacredness of the night. Ilara sat on the cabin's wooden porch, wrapped in a thick blanket, her bare feet resting on the cool boards. A small lantern flickered beside her, its amber glow casting soft shadows on the pine-worn walls. Above her, the sky unfurled into deep navy, pinpricked with the first stars of night. They shimmered gently, as if blinking sleepily with the rhythm of the earth's breath. She sipped a warm tea brewed from the cabin's garden, lavender, lemon balm, and a touch of wild honey. Its calming scent curled into the air, joining the quiet chorus of evening. Her heart was quieter now. She was beginning to feel the way the lake felt, still but not empty, silent but alive. As night deepened, a whisper in the wind called her back to the water. Not urgent, just present, a soft invitation. She stood and followed the familiar path, the way lit only by moonlight and memory. The trees swayed gently, their branches brushing one another like old friends, exchanging secrets. Dew clung to the ferns and moss along the trail, and the earth smelled of rain, though no storm had passed. When Ilara reached the lake, her breath caught. It was unlike anything she'd seen before. The water was perfectly still. Not even the slightest ripple moved across its surface. It reflected the night sky so precisely that it felt like the stars had fallen into the lake and simply decided to stay. Moonlight poured across the water like silver silk, illuminating the mist that hovered just above its surface. It was as though the entire lake was breathing, inhale, exhale, in rhythm with the night. She stepped closer, her toes curling into the cool grass at the shore. The air buzzed faintly, not with noise, but with energy, a hum of presence. The lake, she realized, was most alive in the quietest hours. She sat at the edge, folding her knees beneath her, and stared into the mirrored sky. The longer she looked, the more she felt herself dissolving, not in a frightening way, but in a freeing way. Her edges softened, her thoughts thinned, her heartbeat slowed. The lake didn't demand anything from her. It didn't ask her to fix, to prove, to perform. It only asked her to be, and in return it offered its own presence, steady, soft, and unconditional. A dragonfly skimmed across the surface, its wings catching a glint of moonlight, then vanished into the trees. An owl hooted softly in the distance. The rest of the forest watched in silence. Elara lay back slowly on the grassy bank, her head cushioned by moss and her eyes open to the stars. The sky above and the lake below were identical, twin worlds of stillness holding her in between. She felt as though she were floating in both at once, weightless and held. Time no longer had meaning. The night unfolded not in hours, but in breaths. One breath for the sorrow she had carried, one breath for the peace beginning to grow, one breath for the girl she had once been, one breath for the woman she was becoming. The healing didn't come like lightning. It came like water, quiet, slow and constant. It came with stillness, with presence, with night. She felt it inside her, that shift, the transformation that happens when you're no longer rushing toward healing, but resting inside it, here in the arms of the night and the mirror of the lake. Elara felt not only restored, but remembered, as if some part of her soul had always lived by these waters, always known this kind of stillness. Her eyes grew heavy, not with exhaustion, but with peace. She curled onto her side, blanket pulled gently over her shoulders, and let the hum of the lake lull her. And as she drifted into sleep beside the still waters, stars blinking above and below, the last thought to whisper through her heart was this: this is what it feels like to return to yourself. Elara awoke slowly, as if the lake itself had gently nudged her back into waking. Morning mist curled over the shoreline like a veil, soft and pale against the first blush of dawn. She stretched where she lay on the mossy bank, the blanket still wrapped around her like a cocoon. Her body felt rested, her spirit calm, as though she had slept not just through the night, but through centuries of wait. The lake shimmered in soft pinks and pale golds, utterly still. The reflection of the sky on its surface was so perfect that it was hard to tell where water ended and air began. Something inside Elara stirred, not a thought, but a knowing. Today she was meant to go deeper. She stood, brushing dew from her hands, and walked barefoot to the edge of the lake. The water lapped gently at her toes, cooler than she expected, but not unfriendly. She stepped in slowly, the ripples gliding out in white circles. There was no fear, only a quiet anticipation. The lake had earned her trust. With every step forward, the water climbed higher, ankles, knees, waist, until she stood chest deep in the center, embraced by the stillness. Her arms floated outward, weightless, as if the water wanted to hold her. The lake was not cold now, it was soothing, like the touch of a loving hand across a fevered brow. She closed her eyes, tilted her head back, and allowed herself to float. Above her, the sky continued its slow transformation into morning. The sun, shy and soft, filtered through the mist in strands of gold. The water cradled Elara gently, rocking her with tiny movements, like a mother might sway a child to sleep. And then she felt it, a warmth, not from the sun, not from the surface, but from beneath her. It pulsed gently through the water like a heartbeat, rising up to meet her. It wasn't a physical warmth, it was something more tender, more ancient. It touched something within her, deep in her chest, and she inhaled sharply, not from fear, but from recognition. Something was rising from the depths. She opened her eyes slowly and looked down. The water below her had begun to shimmer faintly, like moonlight on metal. A soft glow emerged from the depths, not harsh or blinding, but gentle, like the glow of fireflies caught in a jar. Elara watched in silence as something began to rise, slowly, reverently. It was not a thing to be feared, but a gift meant to be received. From beneath the surface came a smooth, rounded stone, pale blue, speckled with silver. It hovered just beneath her outstretched hands, resting in the water's embrace. Elara cupped her palms and received it as if it were sacred. The moment her fingers touched it, she understood. The stone wasn't magic in the way of stories with spells and wands. It was magic in the way that truth is magic, quiet, enduring, and powerful. It pulsed softly with a warmth that traveled up her arms and settled in her heart. Memories rose, memories of herself, not as she was, but as she had once been, fearless, curious, open. She saw a version of herself before the world had layered its expectations, its wounds, its noise. The stone was a reminder. You are not broken, it seemed to say. You have only forgotten your way, and that forgetting too is part of the path. Elara held it to her chest and closed her eyes. The water around her rippled gently like a lullaby played on strings. Tears came, not from sadness, but from relief. All this time she had been searching outside herself for healing, and now here it was, not handed to her by someone else, but awakened from within. The lake had not given her something new. It had simply returned to her what was already hers. She whispered softly, "Thank you." Her voice barely carried above the water's hush. Slowly, she returned to the shore, the stone still in her hands, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She wrapped herself in the blanket, sat on the bank, and watched the sun rise fully above the trees. The lake glistened, silent and knowing, as if smiling, and in her lap the gift from its depths glowed faintly, reminding her that what is sacred is often hidden, waiting patiently to be remembered. The sun had fully risen by the time Elara made her way back to the cabin, the smooth blue stone cradled carefully in her hands. Morning birds sang in the trees with soft chirps, like the gentle stirrings of a new day. The forest smelled of pine and earth and light, an aroma that felt ancient, as if the world had just been washed clean. Inside the cabin, everything was exactly as she had left it. The wooden floor creaked familiarly beneath her feet. The little table still carried the remains of last night's tea, and the hearth, though quiet, radiated a sense of home. But something within her had shifted so deeply that it was as if she was seeing it all for the very first time. She placed the glowing stone on the windowsill, where the morning sun touched it gently. It didn't shine quite as brightly now. It didn't need to. Its work was done. The healing it had awakened would not fade with time. It had nestled itself into her spirit, quiet and enduring. Elara spent the rest of the day slowly, with deep intention. She wandered the nearby meadows, brushed her fingers over wildflowers, and dipped her hands into the clear stream that wound its way through the forest. She found herself smiling at the wind, pausing to listen to the hush of leaves, laughing when a squirrel dashed past her and flicked its tail in sass. The world hadn't changed, but she had, and somehow that made all the difference. As the sky turned to dusk and the forest softened again into blue shadows and gold-edged clouds, Elara returned to the lake one final time. The path felt even more familiar now, like a trail, not just of footprints, but of memory and transformation. The lake greeted her with its usual hush, its surface calm and waiting. Fireflies danced along the edges, blinking lazily as though they too were beginning to feel drowsy. Elara sat down on the same mossy bank where she had slept just the night before, the same spot where she had floated, received, remembered. But this time she wasn't searching. She was simply present, She closed her eyes and let the breeze brush her skin. She thought of all the things she had let go, the fear, the pressure, the idea that she had to be more, do more, heal faster, and in their place she had found something far greater: stillness, belonging, peace. It wasn't perfection, but it was wholeness, and that, she realized, was enough. As the stars began to bloom across the velvet sky, she whispered into the dark, "I'm ready now. Not ready to leave, not ready to abandon this sacred place, but ready to carry its truth with her wherever she would go next." The lake didn't respond with words. It didn't need to. Its reflection shimmered quietly, like a nod of agreement between old friends. Elara rose slowly, taking one last look at the water, letting the silence wash over her one more time. Then she walked back to the cabin, under a canopy of stars, each one winking softly, as if ducking her in. Inside, she lit a small lantern and placed it on the bedside table. The bed was soft and warm, wrapped in linen sheets that smelled faintly of lavender. She slipped under the covers and lay still, staring at the wooden ceiling above, her hands resting gently on her stomach. Her mind was quiet, her heart was full, and her soul was at rest. Outside, the lake whispered to the night. The trees stood in gentle guard, and the stars watched over it all. Elara let out a long, slow breath, a release, a surrender, a beginning, and as her eyes drifted closed and her body sank deeper into rest, the world around her seemed to murmur in a voice only dreams could hear. "You are whole, you are loved, you are home. Good night, dear soul. Sleep softly, the healing has begun."